Ivan Klima is a renowned writer from the Czech Republic. Among his novels are Love and Garbage, Judge on Trial, and No Saints or Angels. His memoir, My Crazy Century, spans 6 decades that included war, totalitarianism, censorship, and the fight for democracy. My Crazy Century reflects on Ivan Klima's remarkable life, while also looking at this critical period of 20th century history, from World War II to the oppressive grip of communism, from the brief hope of freedom during the Prague Spring of 1968 to the eventual collapse of the regime in 1989's Velvet Revolution. Klima's revelatory account contemplates the ways in which this crazy century led mankind astray and impacted the lives of not only Klima's generation, but today's generations still grappling with totalitarian societies. So let's start with the prologue. In the prologue, you say that the Communist Party, or more precisely the communist movement, is a criminal conspiracy against democracy. And that rings so true today when you look at what Putin and Russia are doing to undermine Western democratic elections. So perhaps you could just expand a bit on this conspiracy.
I don't like speak about any conspiracy because the Soviet Union is not strong enough to subvert the democratic system in the West. I hope that it will be other way around, that the democracy will more or less remove this remnants of totalitarian system which is still in contemporary Russia.
Yeah, that's the question that's sort of hard to answer. Why didn't the Russian people rise up and revolt against dictatorship like other Eastern European countries? Why do you think they're still under...
Russians are different people than the people in Poland, in Hungary, in Czech Republic are much more influenced by democracy coming from the West and much more influenced by the French Revolution at the end of 18th century. Russia is too far and too close to their own history, to their own tradition. So it's a great difference between Eastern Europe and Russia.
So you think it's the history, but are the people more docile or are they just dumber? Why do you think they haven't embraced...
People? You mean Russian people?
Democracy, yeah.
They are under influence of their own tradition, which has no democracy at all in the Russian tradition. Or they have maybe few months in 1917. Today, quite different situation in our republic because we have some democratic tradition from all Austrian Empire and from the First Republic, Masaryk, Beneš, and the democratic leaders. So it's an entirely different situation, even in Poland. Mm-hmm. Russia is something quite different.
And Putin, of course, is as popular as ever.
Vladimir Putin is popular in Russia.
Yeah.
Why not? He's a strong man, and probably he developed some economical improvement in Russia. He's a very capable politician.
No, I think he's a very capable politician. Yeah. I think he's very shrewd. Yeah, he knows how to manipulate people. And there's a passage on page 22 where you wonder why you weren't murdered as a child along with your friends. You lost all your friends. That must have really affected the way you lived the rest of your life. How did it affect your life?
It's difficult for me to judge. Maybe less than you should think. More or less, I tried to close the book of my childhood and started a new book after the war. So I don't think very much about the very past. It means about the war, about the concentration camps, about Terazin, and so. Even I don't dream about it in my dreams. Nearly never. And I don't think about it. As children, we were played with the ball, and I had friends there, the friends, and of course all of them were killed. That's true. So I had to find new friends after the war because only one of them survived, and he didn't live in Prague. So I had no friends from the war times. All of them were killed, or nearly all of them were killed. So I had to find new friends, which I succeeded, and I lived more or less normal life. I really succeeded to close the book of the past.
Yeah, it's pretty awful when you think of it, that all your friends just disappeared and you don't know why, and why did you survive? Like that's the question you asked.
I survived probably by the mistake of SS, because of my father. My father was in one moment SS leaders of the camp. They got the order from Berlin that he is a scientist and he should be especially sent to some studio or something like that. They of course didn't understand anything, but they had the feeling there is something special in the fate of my father. Also that in reality he was sent to another camp in some special bureau or something like that, which should develop some new machines for the army. Never happened because the Russians were coming soon to the camp and they were evacuated, and I'm describing it in the book. So nothing happened, but because of it we stayed in the Terazin.
Terazin, the concentration camp.
The Terazin was concentration camp, but it was my camp, I can say, in comparison with Auschwitz or some other camps. So you could survive Terazin.
Well, it was on the outskirts of Prague, right?
Terazin is close to the frontiers, but it's 60 kilometers from Prague. It means 45 miles or so it's close to Prague. There were two camps. One was a normal concentration camp for political prisoners, and the second was a ghetto, which was only for Jews. Terazin is a town which was built mostly for army in the 18th century. So there was some big barracks, maybe 3 or 4, 5 barracks, I think. So we lived in barracks, and within 1 year, SS, in Germans, they evacuated all civilians from the whole city, and the whole city was changed in the ghetto. All houses were full with people. In such a room, about 20 people, I think.
In a room that's
like this one.
10 feet by,
Yes.
or 15 feet by 20 feet. So once the war was over, you experienced the thrill of a newly won freedom. Perhaps you could explain how that felt.
Sorry?
The thrill of getting out of the concentration camp.
It was a wonderful experience. I was more than happy. I was ecstatic state when I left. I went through the gate and I was free man. It was wonderful.
How old were you when you got out?
14.
So you have a good memory of that.
Yes, of course. So,
I was struck by the fact that you mention forests throughout the entire book. You make odd references. There's a beautiful little passage. You said, now this is, I think you're talking about a woman that you had an affair with. But you said here, both of us adored nature. I had been deprived of entire summers during childhood, and since then I've harbored the natural world in my thoughts like an articulated image in which forests merge with fields and fields with meadows and meadows with ponds. It abounds with nameless fragrant flowers and anonymous birds warble around. So why did you yearn after the forest, do you think?
forest for me it was open nature, and Terazin was a fortress. So it was really closed by, jak se to říká,
Walls.
by walls and takový that's jako...
Příkop?
Co?
Příkop?
Příkopy, jak?
Ditch.
Jak?
Ditch.
Ditch, yeah, by
Kind of like a moat.
yeah. It was entirely,
So you associated forests with freedom then?
Yeah. It was, and still is. I like go to the forest the whole life. My hobby is picking mushrooms.
What does that mean? Nabokov had his butterflies, and you've got your...
No, butterflies, no.
No.
For me, mushrooms.
How do you collect mushrooms? You just go out and pick them, and sometimes you eat them, and what do you do? Do you press them, or do you keep them, or not?
I keep them. We use it mostly in a dried, sušené podobě, in
Dried state.
Did you store them somewhere?
No,
Yes.
You eat
When
them.
it's dried, I can show it to you. Maybe I have it. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
But now it's a print.
What were we looking for there?
no mushrooms.
No mushrooms.
So you hunt them. I guess there's different types of mushrooms that
Yes.
taste different.
Yes, they are.
And some are poisonous, so you wouldn't eat those.
Is there some are very poisonous.
Yeah.
You can kill really a lot of people with even with one piece of mushroom. You can kill one person. It's only one which is very poisoned.
You mentioned that in your book.
Are you sure? It's such a green amanita. It's in Latin.
And they're still around Czech Republic?
Yes, many. So it's my hobby. So I know
How many different varieties of mushroom are there?
hundreds, if not thousands. So I know maybe. I don't know how many, 30, 40, 50. I can be sure about.
Did you have a checklist? So you could, when you saw one that you hadn't seen before, you checked it off your list?
I have many books on it.
Let's get back to your life then. You left the concentration camp. You studied?
Not in the camp. I cannot study there.
No.
There's few, maybe we had some school here maybe for 2 months.
That's
That was
right.
all. Really nothing more.
So you were behind when you got out of the concentration camp. You had to catch up.
I had one lady which was a teacher in her private life. I tried to really. I started my career as a writer in the camp, and somebody, I don't know who, gave it to this lady who was a teacher of Czech language. She thought that I am gifted for writing, so she gave me some lectures in Czech language and in writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I had some schools even in the camp, really entirely private. Only for me it was done, and it was really very generous from this lady because we couldn't pay her for these lectures.
And so were you doing journalism or were you writing short stories or what? In the camp.
When I read some short stories, but not many. I didn't write many things in the camp. I wrote most when I came back to Prague.
And then you got into journalism.
I was obsessed by writing, so I remember that when I came back from the school, I sit behind my table and I wrote a long fiction, which was entirely, jak se říká takové, když je něco úplně jako, no mizerná literatura, brak.
Brak?
No,
Junk.
Junk.
Wasn't good?
It was junk, yes.
You got to start somewhere,
Such a
right?
love story. I wrote. I had no girlfriend at the time, but I wrote a really love affair story.
It was wishful thinking.
Yes.
You wanted that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You are correct.
Yeah. You were also, well, let me just quote here from the book. Why should people be left to the mercies of some coal barons and the like, who cared only about increasing their own profits? For them, the worker was merely a means. We needed a society that would ensure that nobody suffered, that people were able to live their lives with dignity. And so you joined the Communist Party because you believed that this is what it stood for, what it promised to deliver, and you followed your father doing that. Do you think you were naive?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Very naive.
Idealistic?
But idealistic. You should take in consideration this atmosphere after the war. It was such avalanche of left-way thinking. It was not my specialty. It was really many of my friends of my age, but not so many. I remember that in the years of my studies, when I was 14 or 15, so we made something like elections in the school with the 4 parties which were official parties of the time. We had only 4 parties after the war.
Mm-hmm.
Before the war we had 25 parties or how many. But after the war we had 4 parties. One was Communist Party, Social Democrats, and it was the left parties, left wing, and the right wing parties were socialists and the Catholic Party.
Catholics?
Catholic Party.
Church and state were together.
No, they were Catholic, but they were quite known political party, but they were Catholic mostly.
Yeah.
In the leadership and in their philosophy and political programs, they were influenced by Catholicism.
Okay.
Christian Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And Social Democratic Party.
Christian Democratic Party.
Christian Democratic Party.
So that was in your school, there was that election.
There were elections, and as I remember, the communists lost in the school.
Okay.
But not in the reality.
No, unfortunately, no. But they had force, power behind them. So this moving forward a bit, the party booted your father out at one point and imprisoned him.
Yes, you are right.
And I enjoyed the quote where you said that he felt that the scientific research was more important than May Day activities. They were criticizing him for not participating in May Day activities, and he said research is much more important than that.
Yes, you are right.
So he was bitter about that.
Yes.
And that must have been pretty disillusioning for you too.
Yes, you are right.
And at that
it
point,
was very healthy for me. His disillusion helped me to find solution even for me. That I was not very enthusiastic about the Communist Party.
so the scales were starting to fall off your eyes.
Yes.
Just as far as writing novels goes, you said that a person feels nowhere more free and at the same time more responsible than in the world of his own creation. Can you expand on that? Okay. That's what you said.
Probably it's in translation it is.
Let me just see here. There's 159.
We can find the Czech equivalent in it.
Můžeš mi to přeložit, jo?
No, že, jak bys to přeložil, že se...
There's freedom in your own imagination, but there's also responsibility. I'm just trying to get at what's the responsibility.
Co je odpovědnost?
No, odpovědnost té tvý představivosti, že ty říkáš, že nejvíc je člověk svobodný ve své představivosti, ale zároveň je tam určitá zodpovědnost, ta konceptace je ta zodpovědnost ve tvý představivosti.
It's a responsibility, yeah? It's a difficult question. What is responsibility? You should be responsible for all your activities, for the way you are thinking, for all questions which is bringing every day. That's responsibility. And
What is it responsible to your own conscience?
yes,
or
yes, to be conscious
Mhm.
and maybe to some ideals you have.
some beliefs? Or
Some beliefs, yes. Some ideals. In the very beginning, I believed in some ideals of communism. Later, very soon, I believed in ideals which are mostly in Bible.
the Bible,
Bible,
like the Ten Commandments.
yes. Yes, and in some quotation of Jesus. Of course, each place is important in Bible, but there are some crucial places which is its validity forever. Validity forever, or validity,
Truth forever?
truth.
Okay, I've got another tough question for you, that using your own words. And that is, I was learning that people's fortunes, if described in the key moments of their lives, say more about life, about its values, erroneous faiths and illusions, than lengthy meditations. So it was learning that people's fortunes, if described in the key moments of their lives, say more about life, about values, erroneous faiths, and illusions than lengthy meditations. That ring a bell?
It's
It's his own words, but not his own language.
No, and
so-
it's also it's the translator's
Right.
language too. So
Right.
it
Kde to máš, táto?
Já myslím pravo, to bude, počkej, wait a moment.
Yes. Might have a hard time finding the exact phrase though, because it's probably not on the same.
Oh, but
No,
it's
no,
also in some context, you know. It's,
Yeah, exactly.
So what chapter?
What's the
Is
chapter?
Let's see. It is.
That has two parts in Czech.
Oh yes, it's right. It's longer, isn't it?
It's shortened in the English version.
It's shortened. Yeah. Here he is. This
Not
is.
very much, but it is.
This is. It looks like 11.
it may be different.
Ale já vůbec nevím, jestli to je v češtině taky tak 11.
Numbering in
Yeah, different page for sure.
Taky
Jsi to hrozně
poškrtaný tady.
proškrtal.
anglicky vydání právě.
Tak možná to tam...
It's a bit more than halfway through.
Jo,
The chapter.
polovině ty 11. Našla jsi to, jo?
And the beginning of that page there, it sort of says, I was getting ready to write my first novel, and I thought I would try to articulate my opinions on the meaning of life, love, and war, and justice.
Našla jsi to, jo?
Ne, hledám.
Now here I've got the same, this earlier quote that I gave you, it's on the same page. A person feels nowhere more free and at the same time more responsible than in a world of his own creation. That's on the same page. It's not. I mean, if we can't find it.
Maybe it's not in the original.
Maybe this is the translator's idea. He just slipped that in.
No, it was a very good translator.
Yeah, no.
I have to defend him.
I'm sure. Not to worry if we can't find it. I'll just move on. Let's get back to the Communist Party, and I'll just read a quote about stupidity. Since time immemorial, military service has combined drills, stupidity, and the unlimited suppression of any manifestation of intellectual ability, individuality, and freedom. The combination of this tradition with Russian brainlessness and communist illiteracy, however, resulted in something that exceeded all imagination, not to mention common sense. It's beautiful.
I think so. Yes, that was my experience when I took part in some action of the highest circle of party, which was organized for the, they called it agitation, in the fields, I can say, in the cities, small cities and villages. And I took part in it, and I was surprised. I was entirely Potemkin village. They were sitting, playing cards, drinking beer and doing nothing else, but then they wrote about their activities, how they visited the village. It's no truth at all. So everything was such.
These were communist party officials?
Yes, party officials in the districts. So I was surprised that everything was only fairy tale. So I was surprised that really everything was fiction. Nobody went to the village. Nobody spoke to people. Everything was only such a fairy tale for highest circle of the party. So it was for me. I was a little surprised that it was such a game.
Yeah, it was all lies. So how did that make you feel?
No, it was for me. It was such opening window to the reality, because before I was studying the university, which is such a closed world, and then when I entered the reality, so I found that everything was a fairy tale, such a game.
So did it make you want to change things?
If I intended to change the things?
Were you angry?
No, angry. No, I wasn't angry. I started to understand the reality, which was for me very important. I was happy that I opened the window to the reality.
Truth.
So for me it was great, and I tried to use this discovery in my writing.
You worked as an editor for Lidové noviny?
Yes.
When was that?
It was in the late 60s, 67, 68, as I remember. 69.
Okay. One thing that stuck out for me is that it was a journal that, quote, masterfully combined all journalistic and literary genres. So it wasn't just a newspaper. It also included.
It was a cultural weekly.
Yes.
And it had a huge circulation.
Yeah, it was a culture politic, because the culture in the times played an important role in politics.
It was a tradition of this country that the writers were something. To be a writer was something very important in the society.
Somebody admired.
Yes, somebody admired. So it was a very high circulation, over 100,000 copies.
Yeah. That's extraordinary, having a cultural magazine. Was it a magazine or a newspaper?
No, it was a newspaper. It was a weekly newspaper. This newspaper was published by the Writers'
Union
Association, and it was also very political, not only.
But it was censored, though.
Everything was censored.
About this time, you wrote your first play, The Castle, which has nothing to do with Kafka.
Just the title.
The dialogue mirrored the entire absurdity of the reality in which we were all living. A metaphor for the ruling and untouchable party. Apparently, when you wrote that, it just came out very quickly. It was easy to write. Is that true?
It was not difficult to write for me.
You wrote it quite quickly.
Quite quickly, yes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Was there a motivation behind that?
Yes, of course, it was political motivation for it. It was understood by audience entirely. There were many applaudissements during the play, and actors were very happy, because it was not very often that there was such answer from the audience. It was very political play in some way.
Well, you were surprised that it got approved to be put on.
I was surprised, and maybe I wrote it that the main reason was that the main censor, I was playing cards with him. It helped that the play was approved by the censorship, because that I played the cards with this man.
You think so?
I'm sure, quite sure.
So he liked you?
He thought I a quite good fellow, and he didn't understand literature at all. I don't know. His profession it's not important. He was really a worker by his profession.
And you don't think he understood the metaphor? You don't think he understood?
No, he didn't understand anything. He was very. I cannot say stupid. He was very primitive.
The murderers who were the unpunishable notables, could not let the one who testified against them live. Incidentally, that the play was put on in Germany, and you indicate that the Germans laughed at different places than the Czechs laughed at. Why was that?
It's true. So the Czechs were laughing mostly on some political narážky, jak se říká narážky?
Comments.
Political comments.
Political sense of.
And Germans are laughing entirely different.
Oh, that's right. I think you mentioned that if someone kicks you in the butt, they'll laugh at that. That's when they laugh, is when someone...
Yes, you are right. Yes.
Slapstick, kind of.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is a pretty condescending way of looking at it.
Very primitive reason for laughing. In that time, in this country, it was mostly some political
pointed comment.
Some political comments, yes.
Isaac Deutscher, who wrote the book on Stalin.
Yes.
You were impressed with that, and you met him in Britain. You learned a lot about the Stalin regime from that book, that Stalin was a tyrant. But he said, we must guard the idea of socialism and its undeniable advantages over capitalism.
He was a real communist. In his way of thinking, Stalin was not a communist. Stalin was a dictator. And he defended a real communism, which is fantasy and utopia. Anyway, he believed that it exists, and he tried to persuade me that it exists, and we should fight for real communism.
The ideal.
The ideal, yes.
Yeah.
He was fantastic, utopian. But he was an admirable person, very, very educated, and his book on Stalin could open the eyes of many people. He was very much influenced by Trotsky.
Yeah, this is a good one here. One of the most important questions in modern society is how to control power. So, what means can we use to control power?
Some democratic ways, there are some ways how to control power. One thing is our free medias, and of course freedom of speech for religions, and freedom for political parties, or I can say for democratic parties. I am not entirely freedom for some nationalistic or some anti-democratic parties. It should be probably eliminated from the political life. But all democratic parties should be allowed and in some way supported by law.
And are you comfortable with that that's the case in the Czech Republic today?
Yes. We have, I guess, we have democracy, no?
Yeah.
It's a young generation here.
You know, one of the biggest problems with the democracy, in, at least from where I come from, is apathy. Only 50% of the population votes.
So we are in some way, it's a better situation. No?
Also about 50%.
How many?
Also about 50% people are going to elections.
Only 50? No, more. I'm sure that a little more.
Still there's still apathy though, even though this country is
Já mám pocit, že to chodí asi 80%, ne? 60%.
I'll move on to another question, and that is, you talk about, in several places, literature is not political. I do not think the task of literature, even though it is sometimes assumed so, is to concern itself with politics. And yet it seems to me that your novels, although that's maybe not the primary motive, are very political.
It's not in contradiction. I only proclaim that it's not a main task or main role of literature to be political. But in some periods of time, of history, they became political, and it's okay. Also, sometimes they played political role, so that are not political at all inside, but it played political role because it's situation of the society. Everything is playing political role, political.
What do you think then for you, what are the ingredients that make for a great novel then?
A great novel should be on human's relation. That's the main task for literature, to describe all complications of human relations. Mm-hmm. That's the main task for the literature.
To help people through their own lives, or?
It means the relations among the people are between man and woman, between friends, between man, his enemy, and so on and so on. It's the human relations. It's the only subject for literature.
Well, that opens things up to. You talk quite freely about an affair that you had in the memoir, and yet it seems to me that you were kind of miserable in that affair. And then you talk about another affair, but you stop very abruptly after the second affair, saying, I'm not going to talk about this. My question is, why did you mention it in the first place then?
I must admit that I don't remember why.
Okay. You just felt like you wanted to be honest, but you didn't want to get into details because...
Mostly, it's not... You are right. I don't like to really mention some details of my own relations.
But as I say, you say that relations are the fundamental reason for novels.
Yes, of course, relations, but it shouldn't be on your own relations. It means human relations.
But you're learning about relations through your own experience.
Yes, it's based on my own experience, but mostly if you are writing a fiction, more than 50% is invented. Maybe, I cannot say how many percent because it's not mathematics, it's literature, but most is invented. Or it's so changed that it's not based on a real experience.
But do you want it to be true to life, I would think? Does it even have to be true to life?
To life, but not to my own life.
Not your own life, okay. Not necessarily autobiographical.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Gorky's advice was to go among the people, and that's what you did as an orderly in a hospital.
Yes.
And were you a garbage man for a month?
Maybe even a little less, but I was, yes.
And what did you learn from that?
I used some experience. They were very, very interesting people in some way for me, from the other bank of the river. For me, it was very, very useful experience to meet them, and mostly to observe their working activity. It was real socialism in that time, and we were maybe 2 hours. We were paid for 8 hours, but of course in socialist relations, so it was like maybe in the West like for real 2 hours, but we were paid for 8 hours, we were working for 2 hours, and the rest were sitting, partly we were staying, discussing, then we were sitting in the pub and so on, and we were paid for 6 in the morning till 2 afternoon. So we stayed maybe the road maybe for 4 hours maximum, and the rest we were sitting in the pub.
That doesn't speak too highly of socialism.
It was such a way of working. It couldn't be probably in the factories, but in many small working places it was quite common. Because I was working in the hospital, as also mentioned there, so we were really working maybe for 2 or 3 hours per day instead of 8 hours. Mm-hmm. And the rest where we were sitting, we were a special room, and we were sitting there and drinking and chatting.
The productivity wasn't too high.
It wasn't, no.
I want to talk about, I'm sort of winding down here, okay, the U.S. and writers. Some of the writers that you met include Arthur Miller and Philip Roth. You observed that they saw their society as one that would perish of overabundance, and objects had become goals in themselves to describe the United States. Do you agree with that?
Jak zawést zbytečný kapitalismus.
He says people were trying for the material stuff and the capitalism here too, so it's not really sure if that's something to agree with, because at that time we wanted what
They
you
had,
so
yeah. And now what?
Now
what?
Now we are, the Czechs are always in some kind of rebellion.
Rebelling.
Yeah,
Rebelling, yes.
Okay.
against everything.
They're always against, yes.
Against the regime, against the government,
Yes.
against the system.
Here's what you say about Philip Roth. I don't think any other author has written with such understanding and earnestness about the oppressive fate of Czech writers and Czech culture.
He was visiting mostly Czechoslovakia because he has friends here. He mostly visited us, and I invited my friends writers, and we had such common discussion, maybe 10 or even more people. And it was for him very interesting experience. And then he wrote about it, and he tried to help mostly Czech intellectuals to improve their situation. He was very helpful, I must say. He even helped to find context for the writers to publish outside and so on. So he was extremely helpful person.
Just because he empathized with your situation?
With the persecuted people.
Okay.
As a Jewish writer, he has much more understanding for oppression than normal, than all other people.
We talked earlier a bit about collecting, and you go mushroom hunting. Do you also collect old maps?
Yes.
How has that been? Is it still an interest? Was it a passion?
No, it was not passion. I found that it's a very good way how to save your money. Because the old maps, they are valuable in each time. The money, you cannot believe in money. They can lose their value entirely overnight. So that was one of the reasons.
You invested in old maps?
Yes, you can invest money in your...
And you didn't lose any money?
You cannot lose your money.
You have to be smart, though. You have to know what you're doing to buy a genuine...
You should understand it, and you should find some shops where they didn't understand it.
Okay, that's the trick. Yes. Yeah. The problem is, of course, with the internet, even though they're not experts,
Maybe.
they all know how much it's worth now.
Yes, you are right, but it was time
Back
without
then.
internet, yes.
Yeah.
I have some money in... It has its value for, I can say, forever. Because
And you still have the maps?
yes, I have. I don't want to bother you with my old maps, but I have it. If you like to see it, I can show you.
Yeah, I'm a collector myself, so...
You are collecting maps?
Not
No,
maps.
no, not maps.
No.
And what you are collecting?
It seemed like for a period I collected something different almost every month. I had a new idea about collecting different types of books, series or specific designers or, yeah. Can you describe to me what Samizdat literature is?
So Samizdat exists only in the countries where there is some censorship, which doesn't allow to publish all kind of literature. So in this situation, when something is banned, forbidden, so there are some writers who are not published officially, and there are some people who are copying the manuscripts, sometimes in hundreds of copies, sometimes in tens of copies, 60, 70, 80 copies. And it circulated in some market, black market, with this kind of literature. The cost in that time was like it's now for printed literature.
Sorry?
The price of one copy was like it's now for printed literature.
Like the price of a book.
Because it was rather cheap. We paid only typist and paper. And there were no salary for writers, no fee. So it was rather cheap, this book. It was a little over 100 crowns. Between 100 and 200 crowns. It depended on
How many pages?
how many pages, yes.
And is there a market for this stuff?
Today? Or
Yeah.
today?
Are there people interested in collecting this?
Some people are collecting. Maybe it will be probably much more money today for one copy than in that time. But I have no idea what is the price of.
So typically they just look like a printed, an essay that you would hand in.
You did see it, no? You didn't? Did you see it?
I haven't seen any yet, but
Show it.
yeah, okay. So these were illegal then.
It was, it was very complicated. It's complicated to say it was illegal. It was illegal to type it, to make the copies, but it was illegal to sell it, for instance. But it was not illegal for the author to make his copies. So the system was that it was pretended that writers were doing copies for themselves.
Okay, 2 more questions.
Okay.
About collecting. The Padlock series. That's important.
It was important. It was organized mostly by Ludwig Vaculík.
By who?
Ludwig Vaculík. He was my colleague writer,
Mm-hmm.
a very good Czech writer, and he was organized this whole movement of Samizdat, mostly himself. It was his great merit among the people because he really organized the circulation of this Samizdat perfectly. It was a great mission. He really devoted so much time.
Is he still alive or not?
No, he died. He was 6 years older than me.
I just want to quote from your take on, kind of a funny take on Kafka.
Funny?
A funny observation about Kafka. Yours,
funny
yeah.
observation, yes.
Here we are. Literary theorists, critics, and historians are used to moving in a world of ideas, and they express generalizations and then force their abstract world onto the writer they're studying. When they criticize the works of Franz Kafka, whose often dreamlike visions seduce one to ambiguous interpretations, a drastic discrepancy arose between Kafka's ideas and theirs. So what's your opinion, and how does it differ from theirs?
He was wonderful in writing some ideas, and he really invented some suites for it, and he incorporated it among the readers.
Sorry, what was that?
Circulated.
Spread what?
Spread it. His idea, his writing, his
stories?
But it was not his intention.
No, he wanted to have his friend burn or destroy all his work.
He was writing in such special way. Mostly he describing his dreams, his nightmares, his angst, Strache, angst.
Mm-hmm. Angst is good.
And because he's a great writer, so he used very efficient and very powerful pictures or metaphors. But he was really writing about his own feeling, his own suffering, I can say, his angst. He was afraid of women, I must say. He find a picture for it, metaphor for it. He was a great writer. He was a writer. He was not a philosopher.
Do you think he predicted the Holocaust?
No, I don't think so.
That's what some people think.
Holocaust. No, I read it that it was, but it was not so difficult to predict it, something like Holocaust, because it was quite typical for relation between majority of society and Jews. Some persecution. It was sometimes very strong, sometimes light. Anyway, it was for the whole history of Jews.
Just want to finally quote from the epilogue. You say, I believe that for almost my entire adult life I tried to behave like a free person. I wrote about the world not the way I was ordered to, but the way I perceived and experienced it. So you didn't feel any pressure from government, or if you did, you ignored that?
I felt some pressure from the side of the government, but it was quite normal situation of intellectuals and of many writers who are in some opposition. But it was this pressure was much milder in 60s than in 50s. In the beginning of 50s, they arrested people, killed people, and then in 60s it was milder. You could lose your profession, but you could find some another profession, maybe a lower level. Anyway, the oppression in 60s was milder than in 50s. After Stalin's death and under Khrushchev, everything was milder.
Just finally then, could you tell us what there was one important message that you wanted to convey through your writing? Is it easy for you to define what you wanted to say to the world?
No, I cannot say it in one sentence. I try to warn or to say that hatred is very dangerous in the relation between people. Hatred is dangerous in the relation between people. Nenávist.
Hate.
Hatred.
I wrote a lot about love, which is very important in life of everybody of us.
What are you most proud of having written?
The book. Probably I must accept my colleagues' critics, which of course each writer rather hates the critics. Mm-hmm. Anyway, all of them proclaim that the best my book is Love and Garbage. So I
accept that.
More or less, maybe they are right in most sophisticated novel in my writing. Just maybe Judge on Trial, which is partly autobiographical in the beginning. And then probably short stories. According to some leading Swedish critic, I am best in my short stories. I don't know if it's true, but according to Swedish critic, yes.
Great. Well, thanks very much for talking to us about your life and inviting me into your
it was
lovely room.
For me it was a pleasure. Thank you very much for your visit.